Last week, we talked about building strength and power to make you a better runner. But even with the best training, balancing running with the rest of your life isn't always easy. How do you train at a high level while juggling work, family, and personal commitments? At what point should you consider hiring a coach? And how do you know if it's the right step for you? That's what we're diving into today. My guest today is James Montgomery, a coach who has helped runners of all levels, from beginners to elites, reach their goals. He knows when coaching makes a difference, what to look for in a great coach, and how structured training can take your running to the next level. In this episode, James and I dive into the biggest benefits of having a coach, how to know when you're ready for structured coaching, the difference between self-training and working with a coach, and how to find a coach that fits your goals and running style. James, welcome to the Trail Chasers.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking time. Thanks for being here. To start off with, when you're on that kind of start line of a race or before you start a trail run, what are you doing? What is the first thing, what is going through your mind? How do you kind of structure that?
So I laugh because I guess the one thing that coaching has really taught me is to not take myself too seriously and my abilities too seriously. So I think now very relaxed because I kind of think, if I think about some of the guys and girls that I coach and work with, they're at such a high level and that's actually pressure versus for me, it's just trying to get the most out of what I'm going to do on that day. And of course, you've put in effort and time and all those kind of things. But still to just have that sort of perspective. But I think for someone else who's newer to the sport, right? And I'm going to use a rugby analogy, which is terrible because it's such a typical South African guy thing to do. but I do think it's handy in that I went to Wynberg and rugby was obviously quite a big deal. And before I'd got to grade 11, the first side always used to run out and the school would be standing alongside you and everyone would get super hyped up and excited. And I guess you didn't know anything different, right? And you thought that was the way to prepare to play, But I guess with hindsight, what would often happen, you get so hyped up that after 5 minutes, you're actually exhausted of the game, like having started. And we actually had Basil Bay. I don't know how much you know rugby, but Basil Bay is a famous Bishop's coach. And Basil came to coach Wynberg for 1 year. It was quite a thing. And anyway, his first thing he said to us is that you stop running through the school and you walk underneath the poles and you stay calm and you keep your emotions in check. And it was one of the first lessons in actually, I guess, like the psychology of sports. And it really stood out to me as like actually being calm and being clear-minded as opposed to being overly psyched up, and was a far better way to expend your energy. And I think in trail running, particularly a lot of the races that people do, right, they could last 5, 6, 7, 20 hours. So if you're very nervous going into, the start line or overly excited and you get pulled along with everyone else, that's the easiest way to waste energy. So as best as you can, like finding strategies to really calm yourself down, whether it's breathing or meditation or mindfulness, or a nice little trick is to just basically go to your senses. So like, what can you hear? What can you see? What can you feel? What can you smell? Maybe not the best thing in the start line of a trail race, or even worse at the end. But you know what I mean? So it's something to help you ground yourself. It's something to help you be present. And I think if you can do that, of course you're going to be nervous. You've put in effort. But it just allows you to sort of settle those nerves a little bit and hopefully stop you from starting too quickly. And I think the biggest thing is that the biggest mistake people make is they think about how fast they can run relative to how much are they going to slow down. And if you think about that from the start, all of a sudden it often just gives you an ability to start a little bit slower, be present, take everything in around you, and then actually pace yourself a lot better through the race. So I think from beginners all the way through to people who are looking to win a race, it's a handy little tool to have in your toolbox.
I love that. I guess it's so against what everyone kind of usually says, like get hyped up at the kind of beginning. So This episode is sponsored by Gilnockie Socks. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you some time to think about it throughout the episode, and just to get what the 2 words that you would like on the back of your socks. Yeah, so it'll obviously be seen by the people behind you. So
cool. Well, there's not many of those in a race that I do, but that's fine.
Let's get into who you are before we kind of get into the topic. So I don't want you to think too hard or too deep, but what are the kind of 5 most pivotal moments that have happened in your life or your career that have kind of led you to this moment?
So I think one was Basel Bay,
yeah,
and walking under the poles, and then I think there've been many things that have shaped me. The other was reading a book called Fooled by Randomness. And that's written by a guy called Nassim Taleb. And I don't know if you know, I used to work in finance. The first 17, 18 years of my working life was working in finance. And I enjoy reading. And Nassim Taleb was an options trader and wrote a series of essentially essays. One of them's The Black Swan, which a lot of people know, Fooled by Randomness, Skin in the Game. Anyway, Fooled by Randomness was one that really stood out to me. And it's just basically acknowledging the role of luck, randomness, good timing. You spoke about timing, the podcast. And the same thing with timing of coaching, timing of I guess, anything. And how much of a role that can play in your success and failure. So when you have success, not to solely think, well, it's down to my skill, to acknowledge the things in life that have fallen your way. But equally on the other side is when things have gone wrong, to be able to be a bit kind to yourself. So those, I mean, I'd say like 2 probably most pivotal would be those 2. And then I guess people's advice along the way, you know, just I'll never forget when I quit finance for the first time. So I quit in 2019 for the first time, and I had a German boss, and I was always very nervous about quitting to him. He had taken a chance on me, and I remember him sitting there quietly for a while, and I'm thinking, oh, he's gonna rip my head off. And he just said, you know what, if I was in your shoes, I'd do the same thing. Not so much of advice, but just having that sort of that confidence, and then went on to say, you know, you have the skill set and you can always come back to do this. And I think it's been moments like that that's, of course, when you make big changes. I mean, I remember telling my mom I'm going to leave finance and become a running coach. And my parents, I mean, outside of watching Comrades, have no interest in running whatsoever. And I grew up in a very traditional South African family with cricket and rugby and team sports predominantly. And so for them to slowly sort of come around to that idea that I'd kind of given up on this, you know, I guess a pathway that's Sydney was a lot more comfortable. So I just think things like that. And maybe the last one is kind of a similar time. Obviously Meg Mackenzie and I started to run project together, and I'll never forget, I was in the Woolworths and I was contemplating leaving finance, so quitting. And I remember her saying to me, how many people do we need to coach for you to quit? I was thinking about it, and at the time we were probably coaching 60 or 70 people together, and I said probably 100. And she said, do you think you'll get there? And I sat and thought, I'll never forget, I was standing in the Woolworths and Dean Streets at where all the fruit is and the refrigerators, and I thought, like, yeah, I do. And she said, why don't you just quit now? I was like, it's not the way I had been brought up to think, but someone had challenged that, and it resonated with me. And I think there have been a few occasions in life where someone has just said something very simple, and I can be very stubborn, but it just resonated with me in that moment, and really helped me get over the line with whatever decision I was making. So yeah, there's not 5, but
how long did it take you to go from where you were to 100?
It actually took quite a while, but luckily in that time, so I quit, and my boss had said to me, well, why didn't I consult a couple mornings a week? And then a year later I quit again and wanted to travel, and COVID hit, and actually my first day of quitting the second time was the first day of lockdown. Oh, wow. And I remember thinking, like, okay, well, now I'm all in. Yeah. I can't travel, but I'm going to have to make this coaching thing work. And I guess sometimes these things are fortuitous, right? Maybe if that hadn't happened, I don't know, maybe I would have gone traveling, maybe I would have stayed. Yeah. But again, luck, good fortune, having the right people around you. Mm. I mean, that was huge. If it wasn't for Meg, certainly would have, I don't know if Run Project would be where it is now. And if we would have got you at all. So I owe a lot to her.
When was the first time you kind of knew that you wanted to be a coach?
So the first time I started coaching was when I was 13 years old. And I'll never forget, I was coaching the Pee Wee rugby. So I was at Sweet Valley Primary in the southern suburbs, and our under 13 rugby coach, one of the things that he liked us to do was to get involved with the juniors. And so we'd go down whatever twice a week and we'd coach the 7-8-year-olds. And that always stuck with me. And when I went to university, I went back to Sweet Valley and I coached. And so my sort of student job outside delivering pizza for butlers was coaching. So I coached cricket, I coached rugby, coached athletics. And I'd always been passionate about sports as long as I can remember, and not necessarily just running, everything. So there was probably no distinct moment. It was more sort of a realization of a culmination of all these things that had happened. And I got back from London in 2012, so I was 28 at the time, and a lot of my school friends had got out of shape and overweight and had been jawling too much. And I said to them, like, let's go to Wynberg, because they had obviously all the sports fields, but also they'd built an obstacle course. And I was like, let's go do combination of running and obstacle courses. And I'd read a book, so maybe another pivotal moment. I'd read a book called Le Méthode du Naturel, which is essentially about a French natural movement training system that had been developed in I think the early 1900s. And it's just basically a combination of like all these sorts of things, right? It's like jumping and climbing and crawling and running and sprinting and all these kind of things kind of put together, and just kind of made sense to me. I was like, here are guys who are working full-time jobs, actually they're unfit. You need like a way to get them to get started again, and they don't want to go to the gym, and they want to be outside, and they want to be with their mates. And so I did that for 2 or 3 years, and got to a point where we'd have like 20 or 30 people rock up on a Tuesday and Thursday morning in Wynberg. And we were trained, and I did it for free, and I was doing it there like with them. And guys got into shape and they loved it. And a few of them after that said to me, like, would I coach them for Old Fisherman's Challenge or Hart Bay or whatever? I was like, yeah, what the heck? Like, I'll give it a go. And I'd had quite a torrid injury history in my early 20s. And so that actually got me onto trying to understand the movement side of things. But eventually that, I kind of, once I slowly started to figure that out, I was like, actually, well, what training mistakes am I making? Yeah. Why do I keep getting injured? And so I guess, as you unpack that, multiple pivotal moments in life that pushed me in this direction.
And I mean, obviously, if I say, what would say under your name, on your kind of business card? I mean, obviously it says coach, but in kind of in life, in general, what would it say there?
I think the most important thing you can do as a coach is to respect the fact that you don't know everything. There's always new information coming out, and each individual is different. And so I quite enjoy that WhatsApp line status at school.
Yeah, I think
that's always what I would say, because and that's one of the most humbling aspects of this job, is that on one weekend you can have someone do fantastically well, and you can have on the same weekend someone lay an egg and be disappointed and sad, and it keeps you incredibly humble. You can never get, and almost the higher the level of athlete to coach, the more humble you end up staying, because the harder it becomes.
So, as I've kind of mentioned to you, this season's all about kind of getting beginners into trail running and into the sport, And if someone comes to you and says, I'm considering hiring a coach for the first time, what is the first thing that you kind of tell them, or what are the first things that you believe someone should know about that kind of process?
So it's strange, because when I started out running on the mountain, it was just something we did because I lived in Meadowridge and it was close to VOB running club, and we had access to the green belt, so we could get onto the mountain quite easy, and it's just beat just always running on the road, right? And so like trail running wasn't a name. We just ran on the mountain because it was running. And the first few races were coming about, and I think like I'm glad that I saw that part of the sport. And I'd almost say to people, to understand the history of it, to understand that there have been guys training for comrades to oceans, using the mountains as a tool to train and a place to be other than on a road, right? And I think too often we lose sight of the history of something. And so to understand it doesn't have to be this thing with a pack and 2 water bottles and a liter behind your back and 16 different compulsory items of gear. Like, you can literally just put on a pair of shoes, if you wanted your watch, and go for a run in the mountain. And I think too often people get so obsessed with like the gear and the social media side behind it, as opposed to actually just like what makes running such a special sport.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually because you don't need very much to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, that's the beauty of it. And so I think coaching obviously can be incredibly valuable to someone, but I think from a foundational standpoint, like first understand that it doesn't have to be this whole thing. When you start running, you don't have to go to the shop and spend 10 grand. You know what I mean? Like just put on a pair of running shoes. If they're road shoes, that's fine. Go run on the mountain. Like it'll be fine.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. And I think maybe the second thing is that ultimately, like coaching someone that's new to the sports comes down to achieving consistency. And there's nothing fancy about that. So it's not about making people tired. Anyone can do that. You can write a training program, make someone tired. That's not hard. But how do you build consistency over months and years? And that is the key. And I've said this to people, it's like when they're debating, should they get a coach? I said, if you can get yourself to run 5 times a week for a year, you'll get better. At the beginning, that's all you need to do, right? And one day do some strides and one day do some heel strides and practice some hiking and get on the mountain and enjoy yourself. Like you'll get better just because there's no base, there's no foundation, right? So anything you throw at them, they're going to improve from. So like if someone at the beginning can't make someone better, well, then you shouldn't call yourself a coach. So I think in understanding that, and so the biggest thing that I find with people that are new to the sport is just to not get them to try to do too much. Just say, like, think about this over the course of a year. Think about your training over the course of a year. And don't compare it to others. Are you looking at Strava over the course of a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks? And if you can do that, you can build that consistency, even if it's 30 minutes every day for 5 days of the week. You take 2 days off or a day off and you do some strength work, you will improve. And you don't need a coach to do that. People often need a coach for the psychological aspect of that, right? To hold them back. But actually it's fairly simple from the underlying structure of a training program.
You're tuning into Remote Trails Radio. Garrick, you have 35 seconds to answer 4 questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What are the collection of back roads in Washington that you can discover called?
The Washington Backcountry Discovery Route.
On the trail, what's a helpful hand gesture to give the driver you see going the opposite direction?
Oh, you got to give them the shakas.
A number of fingers for number of cars behind you. What are skinny tires called?
Oh, man, I got some of them. They're pizza cutters.
Which podcast is packed with overlanding advice, PNW gems, and outdoor stories?
That would be the Remote Trails Radio.
And at what stage do you usually get people, coming to you to look for a coach? Is it a mix, or is it kind of, mostly beginners, or, do people kind of, as you say, do they take that year and then come to you, or what, or do you have a kind of a complete
I
mix?
guess because of how long I've done this, I'm in a very privileged position where a lot of the athletes that do come to me have a lot of experience. But I mean, I paid my school fees at the beginning, and I coached everyone from people who wanted to run their first 5K to their first 100 miler, and so I guess I still, what's been fun is that a lot of those people I still coach today. So now they're 7 or 8 years on. But if someone has to come to me completely new, I guess it depends really for me. Like, it depends on the person and their goals and what they're interested in. Like, as opposed to, I'm not in a position where I have to take someone on to pay bills. You know what I mean? Which is a fortunate position to be in. And I think for someone looking for a coach, sort of, I guess maybe coming back to your previous question, is like, look for people that understand the history of the sport.
I like that. I also like that, that you're, as you say, like in that position where it's like, go and do this for a year, and then we can kind of, talk, get that consistency going. I think that's also a great, on the flip side of it, that you don't have to take it, but also you don't have to take it because you're forcing someone into doing something. I love that kind of beginning bit, and especially that consistency. I think that's, that's kind of the basis of it all. If we're now taking our mind into the kind of trail run, and you're on a trail run, and you're out there, like 2-3 hours, what are you kind of reaching for in your pack, when the energy starts dipping?
Nutritionists are going to shoot me for this comment. Yeah. I kind of come back to what I was saying at the beginning is running is such a simple sport. And of course, at the highest level, we need to be taking care of the basics. That's your fueling, that's your equipment, all that kind of stuff. But for my stage of running, where I'm not competitive, I do it purely for enjoyment, I typically don't take anything with me.
Oh, wow.
Because I've run for long enough duration of time that, you have a fairly big aerobic capacity, and you just, you can run for an hour and a half or 2 hours and you don't need to take a gel or whatever. Of course, for female athletes, I would never advise that at all. But I think there is something in just being able to kind of being pretty minimalist as to what you're doing, what you're taking with you. I guess if there was, if I had to go for a run with someone, they're literally running for 3 hours. I haven't done that in a while, so I'd probably take a gel just in case I blew up. But again, not overcomplicating it, right? So it's like, what do you need? You need sugar. You need sugar in your bloodstream. So whether that's a glass of Coke, a banana, a gel, some sweets, I wouldn't really get too fussed.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I was saying is like, come back to simplicity, right? The sport in its essence is simple, and they're guys training on very little in the townships in East Africa, and we don't need it to be such a complicated, you don't need to spend $1,000 on nutrition every time you go for a long run. To learn that is an important skill. Like, can you just, there's enough water on the mountain, drink that. And if you need a gel, take a gel or 2 gels, whatever. Of course, if you doing a hard training session and you, I don't know, Kane or Daniel, one of these guys, then fuel up because you got a hard session the next day. I don't. So if I feel a bit average, well, it's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that also, like I think the nutritionist, Jenna Bowes, who we had on last season, we'll have her again we've had her again this season, and she always says kind of like fuel for the work you're doing. So I think that's also like something so important for like beginners to kind of take into.
Yeah. And I guess, as I said, it's very different where I am now and my purpose relative to someone who's new to the sport. Their aerobic capacity is fairly low. They're burning through glycogen because they can't control their intensity. All those things mean that you do need to eat, but don't come back to like the basics of it is what do you need? You essentially need sugar in your bloodstream, right? And so like, it doesn't have to be a super fancy thing. Coke, whatever, bananas. I mean, there are people running super fast marathon times off Coke and banana. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have, I don't know, Morton, and like, you can keep it fairly simple.
Yeah. Going into that kind of beginning relationship, or I guess that consideration of getting into sort of coaching relationship or starting to take on a coach, is there, I mean, obviously there's different points for different people, but is there kind of a consideration to, at this stage you kind of need to take on a coach if you want to go further, or you want to go longer, or is it goal related, or?
So I think you probably need 5 or 6 years of consistent structured training to have formed a decent aerobic capacity. And so like, if someone came to me, I mean, depends on the person obviously and what their goals were, but if someone came to me and said like, look, I've been running consistently for a year or 2, this is my goal, and I like the person and I think they're interesting as a person, not as a runner, but I think they're interesting and I think they prepared to put in the same amount of work that I am, then for me, in that instance, I'll be happy to take them on. But as I said, very seldom when someone reached out and said like, I'm completely new to the sport and I want to do X, Y, I guess my interest is elsewhere now.
Yeah.
But I think like equally the same things you look for in a person, right, is like someone who understands the sport, someone who's been there. I think the other thing that most people underestimate is like has some life experience. Because like if you're taking on someone who's brand new to the sport and they're managing, even if it's just their job, their family and their job and everything else, is like you want some life experience to be able to say, look, I don't expect you to run 6 days a week and wake up at 4 a.m. every day, because like somewhere else, you're going to drop a ball somewhere else in your life. And for me, like that family, relationships, children, like all those kind of things have to be a priority. And so, I mean, you can ask even of the elite guys that I work with, you'll never hear from me to say like, I expected you to do this and you didn't because I know, it was your daughter's birthday or your whatever, wife was sick, or because to me, family always comes first. Yeah. So having that, and that comes from life experience, right? If I was 20, I probably had a different perspective. It's like elite sport, and you need to headbutt your head against the wall until the wall falls down.
Yeah.
You change as you grow up.
Trail running beats up everything, your legs, your lungs, and especially your feet. The last thing you need is socks that give up before you do. That's why I'm thrilled to announce that this season of Trail Chasers is sponsored by Gilnockie Socks. These aren't just your run-of-the-mill socks. Gilnockie socks are made for people who demand more. More performance, more durability, and more comfort. They're designed to prevent blisters with premium moisture-wicking materials that keep your feet dry no matter how long or muddy the trail gets. Plus, they're treated with HydroCool and Silver Plus, so they stay fresh, breathable, and ready for your next adventure. Since I started using Gilnockie socks, I haven't had to stop mid-run to adjust or worry about discomfort. They just keep working mile after mile, run after run. So why settle for socks that don't keep up? Visit gilnockie.com and use the code TRAILCHASERS at checkout for 20% off your first order. Trust me, once you try them, you won't go back. Your feet will thank you. And I mean, obviously there's a lot of benefits to having a coach, but what are the kind of key, the key kind of benefits to getting a coach on board?
So I do think that as we spoke about, consistency is probably the main one. And so someone to hold you accountable to achieving consistency and not trying to do too much. Because a lot of runners are quite A-type, and so they want to do more. And so they don't understand that actually you can do significantly less on a weekly basis, but as long as you consistently do that over the course of a year or 2 years or 3 years, you'll improve a lot. And so I think having that accountability to say, like, sort of slow down. I think in the space that we operate in terms of sort of online coaching, it's very hard to provide motivation to someone. Like, unless someone's self-motivated. I certainly don't like playing the role of like teacher, where you naughty because you didn't do a run. That's not my personality. And so I guess the type of people that I look for, so when I have, I always have a call with someone before I take them on. And in that call, the main thing that I'm trying to gauge is, do I think this person is self-motivated? Are they going to get themselves out of bed in the morning? Because you're not there, right? You can't get them out of bed. So they need to be self-motivated. And of course, there are going to be times where you have to provide motivation, but that underlying intrinsic motivation needs to be their own.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot of, like running coaches. We've had Aaron on the season as well. How do people kind of, choose? It's also, obviously, a lot comes down to a personal relationship, but what are the sort of criteria, you kind of look at when looking at hiring a coach or getting into a coaching relationship?
So I always find this question hard because it's like a lot of the advice I would give would mean that I would never have got a chance. I had an old boss who always used to say, don't pay someone school fees. And in that instance, you're dealing with someone, you're dealing with other people's money. But I mean, in this instance, you're dealing with someone's health, right? And so I do think there's an element of importance to that, is like, just because someone runs fast doesn't mean they're a good coach. And those are quite different skill sets, right? And so I think you want to look for people who, if they are good runners themselves, have life experience along with that. Maybe have had multiple coaches themselves, so they've seen different approaches. I think the worst thing you can do is to find someone whose philosophy, in inverted commas, is someone else's philosophy. Someone's read Arthur Lydiard, and they decided that that's the philosophy that maybe that's worked on them, or that resonates the best with them, without having enough experience to know, well, that's just one tool. And I guess that fits in with understanding the history of the sport, so you can work through fads, because there are always going to be fads, right? Double threshold or whatever the next thing will be. If you understand the history of the sport, you understand when and where it's been used previously, where the pitfalls are. So I think all these kind of things you want to look for in someone, and ultimately, coaching, and if you look back in history, the best coaches were problem solvers. The philosophy is what we've looked back on and called the philosophy, but essentially what they were doing was they had a set of constraints, and that would be environmental constraints, so where they lived, the athletes they were working with, and they had to figure out a way to get the athletes that they're working with from where they were to whatever the goal was, Olympics or whatever it was. And so they had to problem solve around that, right? And if you look at all the greats, they were all great problem solvers. And it's very dangerous to look back and say like, well, that's a philosophy that I'm going to copy and I'm going to apply to people with completely different constraints in a completely different environment. And so to understand the nuance and the context around what coaches have done in history. And that's why I said to you right at the beginning, one of the most important things is to have someone that knows the history of the sport. So I think that problem solving and critical thinking, life experience, I mean, there's so many things, right? And then obviously, as you mentioned, it's having a connection with someone. And the higher the level of the athlete, the more important that is. At the beginning, you have, with someone who's new, you have the knowledge and they don't. And of course, you're trying to provide them with some understanding of it so that they buy in. But it's very different if you're coaching someone with 15 years of running, has had 3 or 4 different running coaches. And to eke out any improvement is a lot harder. You need real buy-in. And that buy-in is not typically about the approach that you're taking, but it's like, do you really care for me as a person outside of running?
Yeah.
From my experience.
That's a good one as well. Are there kind of specific questions you should ask a coach? Well, obviously we've touched on the things, but are there kind of key questions, to kind of find out, and I suppose not only like the right, there's no right or wrong answers, but just to find out if you kind of resonate with someone?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly do my research. I'd have a good understanding of like, there are a lot of coaches that have had, and not necessarily in South Africa, but if you look internationally, there are a lot of coaches who've had fantastic success with a few athletes. They've won Western States, they've won Hard Rock, they've done well at UTMB. How many athletes have they destroyed along the process of getting those there? And so for me, it's like, every time I hear of a new coach and I go look, I'm like, oh, I'm interested to see what this person's done. And obviously they're going to highlight the success that they've had, but then dig a little bit deeper. How many athletes have ended up with reds or stress fractures or left the sport? So I think people can do that, right? You can have a look, on social media and go read up on what athletes are saying about their coaches. I'd have that understanding and then do some basic reading yourself. I haven't looked at like ChatGPT and asked what makes a good coach, but it'd be interesting, like probably some good ideas. And just have some make sure that they've been coaching for a long enough period of time. They've had enough different people and I think a big something to be very wary of is if someone says like, my philosophy is the best way or the only way. Every training philosophy or training approach is just a tool. And you need to be able to pick and choose how to use those tools depending on the situation in front of you, right? High mileage, low mileage, lots of quality, double threshold, all these things are just tools. But you need what I need, Mike needs, all going to be different, right? And so it's to have those tools. And you only get those tools from having experience, having coached a lot of people, and having made a lot of mistakes. Which is hard advice to give because people took a chance on me. And that's why I say I owe a lot to Meg, because a lot of that was down to the trust that people had in Meg and the success she had. So I got lucky. It
was timing, as we were saying. When someone's, I guess, kind of reaching a sort of a point at their sort of running stage, are there things that people should be looking out for in terms of, okay, now it's the right time to get a coach? Is it like, oh, I'm struggling? I think, if I go personally, for me, it was the point where, as you said, like I was banging my head against the wall. I was passionate about running, but I was getting injured. I was getting burnt out. So for me, it was like, that was the point. But
I think that's the point for most people.
Yeah.
The people that have either the genetics to be able to handle what they give themselves. I've got some friends who are fantastic athletes. They've never had coaches and they've run exceptional times just on coaching themselves, a bit of reading. And if I look what is consistent across all of them is amazing genetics. And so a lot of those guys get away with never needing a coach. The problem is often when they become coaches, because what they miss is the fact that they have amazing genetics. And if they stood on their head for half of the year, they'd still run well. It didn't mean standing on their head was a good option, And so, I think that is the most common reason someone comes to you. I'm injured a lot. But I think equally, if you said, enjoy running for a year, run consistently, build yourself up to running 5 times a week. Don't try to do too much. And once you've done that, once you're a year in and like some of that low-hanging fruit is gone, then going to a coach to help navigate that next period of time can be very valuable.
And you find a lot of people come with goals, or do a lot of people come, I've entered this race, help me, or what are the kind of first conversations? Where is it based?
Yeah, so again, I'm in a privileged position where if someone comes to me and says like, I've got 6 months to a goal, but that's kind of the end, then I don't take them on, because I always say it takes me about a year to figure you out, and obviously the higher the level athlete can take even longer. I mean, I think Daniel and I took 4 goes at CCC before I won't say we figured it out, but before we had the level of success that we felt an athlete of his caliber should achieve. And so it takes time. So a lot of people will come to me, and I think a lot of people now know that. So the people that do come to me will typically say like, look, I have a goal. The long-term goal is to run injury-free and to progress. And so again, that's
however long that takes.
You know, I'm here to learn. And of course, some people will be there for a year and then they'll leave. But at least the intention at the beginning, or the stated intention, is to stick around. It takes time to figure people out. If you're genuinely coaching people on an individual basis, and it's not cookie cutter, and it's hard. It's not. Of course, there are people that sit on the extremes, but athletes that are already at a good level, to get them to improve is hard.
Yeah, I think it's important, both ways, I guess. Like, what are you kind of looking for in an athlete, and what an athlete's looking for in a coach? And when it comes to yourself and running, what is your kind of preferred weather? If it starts raining, are you going for it, or are you coming down the mountain, heading home?
For those who don't know, I lived in Chamonix for the last couple of years, and the shoulder season, so the spring and autumn, it probably rains 80% of the time. So if you didn't run if it was raining, then you're never running. So no, I run. I'm not too fazed about weather. And again, I think that's one of the other things that comes back to, for me, like what's like the roots of running. Forget trail running. Like, what are the roots of running? And it's a blue collar sport. It's a sport that should be very simple for anyone to do. And at the highest level, it takes incredible amount of discipline and grit. It's not easy. And I think that's another thing people forget. They kind of see the highlight reel, and they forget how many hours and how hard it is on your body to consistently show up day in and day out and train at a very high level. And for me, that's the attractiveness of running. And so, I'll run if it's raining. But
and going into coaching and kind of improving someone's performance, what are the key things that personalized coaching does, for your performance, or what do you kind of aim to do?
So literally the first thing is that consistency. It's like, can I get this person able to handle the load that I think they're going to need for their goals? And so if someone comes to me and says, I want to run UTCT 55 kilometers at the end of the year, and I say, okay, where are you now? And I map out in my mind how I'm going to get you to that point, working backwards. So what do I think you need in that last 8 to 10 weeks of training? What I think you need in the 8 to 10 weeks of training before that to be able to handle that last 8 to 10 weeks of training? And how do I bridge the gap from where you are now to that point? And so that is why I say coaching someone on a genuinely individual level, not what they advertise, genuinely individual level, is tricky, because someone might come to you and they can run. In fact, someone joined me the other day, a good friend of mine, and at the moment she's running 4 times a week, and she's got some big goals. And so she's got kids, she's moving house, a busy life. Now I've got to think, okay, well, she's a good athlete. How do I get her to that point where she can handle the type of training that I think she needs to match her goals? And how do I bridge that gap now? What are the foundational building blocks that I need in place so that she can handle the training sessions? So breaking down each element of a race. What do you need? If it's Otto, if it's UTCT, if it's Mont Blanc, if it's UTMB, whatever it is, what are those underlying elements? Break them down and work backwards to now. So what do you need to be able to do? And I think a good coach is able to do that. Understand what is general and understand what is specific, and build them from those general foundational qualities towards specific. And the only way you can do that, in my mind, is to coach them on probably at most a weekly basis. I don't think you can guess further than that. And the more inexperienced the athlete, the more true that statement is.
And how important is that kind of goal setting with the athletes?
I mean, this is cliched, but I do think having a process-oriented approach is, for most people, better. So, of course, having a goal. But normally what I say to people is like, we trying to achieve success on one random day of a year. How many times do you go to work and have a bad day? And you don't judge yourself, well, probably not as harshly as you would if you had a bad day on that one race. So just because you have this progression of training and a taper, it doesn't mean on that one day it all comes right. So more often than not, you can have an average day. Every now and again, you can have a shit day, and sometimes you can have an amazing day. So for me, it's to say to them, like, let's have 3 or 4 or 5 races, and let's push up your floor. Let's make sure you're on your worst day, you're better than you ever were before. And then we let the good days take care of themselves.
And there's obviously, we're talking about performance, but also there's the element of technique. You know, what should beginners, you know, kind of expect on that side? You know, obviously come to a coach, you want to get better at running, but, you know, how do you kind of focus in terms of technique and, you know, making them a better runner, not only a kind of a faster or a further runner?
So I think like this comes back to how we learn to move as babies, right? There's no one there saying like, this is your glute and this is your forefoot and this is what pronation and supination is. And so the genius of how we learn to move is that the environmental constraints basically drive those changes, right? As a baby learns to roll and then to crawl and then to stand and then to walk and to run. And so very similarly, for anyone that's ever worked with me, you'll know I'm super passionate about what we call our daily movement practice, which is like 15 minutes daily movement routine, and changes each week, but the principles stay the same. And the goal is essentially that, is like, how do you get people moving a little bit better? Because ultimately, the faster your movement, the more subconscious it should be, right? Usain Bolt is not sitting there at the start of a 100 meter, or certainly in the middle of a 100 meter, thinking, I need to be lifting my knees and my foot needs to land here. Because if he did, he would come last. Okay, so the faster you move, the more subconscious that movement becomes. It's akin to Bill Gates taking out the trash at Microsoft. If your brain is consciously trying to control every element of movement. So how do you provide constraints? Strength work, daily movement practice, short sprints, hill strides, these elements where you're putting in place the neuromuscular foundation to be able to run quicker. And it takes time, but it's like if you're sitting at a desk and someone says to you, sit up straight. In fact, we can practice it now. Sit up straight. How long are you going to last, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to last
difficult.
very long. Okay. So similarly, if you're running comrades where you like, I don't know, someone says, pull up your transverse arch, you're running and you're like, I mean, it's not how the body works, right? So for me, a lot of that work comes in the form of movement practice, strength work, the things like hill strides, stuff like that. And accumulate that frequently. You're doing daily movement practice every day. You're doing strength once or twice a week. You'll ask anyone who I coach, they'll be doing strides, hill strides multiple times a week. Why? Because that's exactly what I'm working on. So getting people away from shuffling and then I think, and this is another thing, is like anyone who tells you that they are able to assess someone's running gait and running form, they're talking bollocks. You have to be so skilled to be able to understand human movement. It is such a complex topic. And there's not many people. I'd say there's probably 1 or 2 in the whole of South Africa that I'm aware of that truly understand movement.
Yeah, sure.
So it's, if someone's telling you need to run one way or another, land on your forefoot or your midfoot, that's bollocks.
I mean, yeah, like coming to that, you know, in terms of online coaching, how are you kind of, I guess, assessing that and, you know, like how does that kind of work?
So obviously, I guess one of the advantage of actually being back in South Africa is you get to see people more often, and you get to see people more often. You get a good sense. There's certainly a smoothness to someone's movement that you can start to see emerge. If you watch someone like Kane run, he's got a beautiful gait. But again, these things take time, right? You're not going to change someone's movement patterns that they've learned and they've been implementing for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years, right? So it takes time. So I don't get overly obsessed in it, to be honest. Do the basics right. If you're able to achieve consistency in running, you'll improve your efficiency. So the more you do something, the more efficient you're going to get, right? So just by running, people are getting more efficient at the movement and then getting them to deeper ranges of motion. Because obviously, if you're just jogging, you're not going, there's not much hip extension or hip flexion. But you get someone to sprint and there's a lot more, right? So you're exposing their bodies to those ranges and getting them stronger.
I guess one of the things you work with the coach is kind of to accelerate your performance or your kind of progress. Do is it something that you don't have to work with the coach, but it's just going to take you a lot longer? Or is it kind of like there's certain fundamentals that people will miss always when they're kind of not working with a coach?
Yeah, as I said to you, I've got friends who've run fantastic times in the marathon at Comrades. They've never had coaches. And I don't know if they'd be better if they had a coach. Maybe, maybe not. I think for a lot of people, it is really, can you help them avoid getting injured?
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then you solve the consistency piece. And therefore they get better.
Yeah.
Does someone need to know a lot to improve for the first 2 or 3 years? No, I don't think so. They just kind of need to know what the pitfalls are and to avoid getting injured.
Yeah.
And that is hard for some people. It's harder for some people than others. But if someone's lucky genetically and they're able to slowly progress themselves, and people get greedy, right? And often I get asked, like, what are the similarities between finance and coaching? And it's behavioral traits. In finance, it's fear and greed. And similarly in running, fear or insecurity and greed, same thing, right? Things start going well and you go from doing 5 times 1K repeats to 10 in 2 weeks, and then you wonder why your Achilles is sore. So I do think it's valuable in helping people to improve. And I guess the other thing is, people don't have the time to sit and think about all the variables, right? I said to you, like, if I'm helping someone for UTCT, or Otter is always a good example. You're like, how many sets of stairs do you have to climb? How often are those sets of stairs? What's in between those sets of stairs? How much technical terrain actually is there? So breaking down the route, most people don't have the time to do that, or are just not interested enough, right? I guess in that instance, you can help them because you've done all that work already. So you can help guide them through that. But as I said, I think there's so much good in learning yourself too at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
It makes some mistakes, and you hope those mistakes aren't too costly down the line. Like, the injuries you do get are of a minor nature. They're not serious. But I think there's a lot to be said for just getting stuck in, like you did as a kid playing a sport, right? You got stuck in and you learned along the way and you made mistakes, and hopefully, as I said, those mistakes aren't too costly. But that's part of the coaching process as well, right? Is that, like, I want people to make mistakes because that's how they learn, that's how they get better. And so I'm a very descriptive coach. It's funny because I come from a very analytical background, but I'm very descriptive. I write out workouts. And so I like people to feel and understand and not get stuck on a heart rate and not get stuck on a lactic number, or they must learn to feel. Their bodies, or our bodies, are telling us what we need to know at all times, right? It's learning to tap into that. And I've been through the running and not letting your heart rate get above a certain level. And I don't know, to me, it just lost a lot of joy. And we're not robots.
Exactly.
And people have achieved fantastic running results and fantastic sport results long before we ever had smartwatches. Get people back to a point where use that as a tool. Help it elevate what you're doing, but don't become a slave to what it's telling you. And that's my own approach. So for me, it's important. And of course, if someone's fairly new, I might use some of those tools to guide them. But at the end, I want them to be able to feel. And if someone says to me, this felt easy, even if I look at their heart rate data and it doesn't look easy, but I know that they've gone through the process of learning, trial and error, then I trust them. Because ultimately, that's the most important thing. Is like, what are they feeling? And as long as that gauge is fairly accurate, when we're writing our training programs, it's not like someone's executing it to an absolutely perfect T. They're not. They are in the ballpark. And those are the ones that know what they're doing. The other ones are, every time they run up a hill, they're in zone 2 or zone 3. It's like, this always laugh with all the double threshold stuff. It's like, most people, every time they run up a hill on Table Mountain, they're doing threshold work.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't call it that, but that's what they're doing, right? And so how much threshold work do people, your average runner who runs in the mountain, how much threshold work they do? It's probably 80-20. So why don't you add more? Well, because you're already doing 80% of your running there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's why I say it's an understanding the context and
Very location based as well, I guess. Yeah.
education based. And so where there are people, I mean, I coach a guy, someone asked me the other day actually, who's the most interesting person I coach? And I coach a firefighter and he's in the Middle East. And I have to ask him to send me photos of like the terrain that he's training on and stuff. I obviously use a treadmill quite a lot, but to just send me a photo and obviously the temperature, because it's just so different to what I'm used to. And so like if I was basing training solely on the heart rate, I mean, it'd be useless because I don't know, 40 degrees every day, you know what I mean? Or he's training at 12 o'clock at night after a full day shift or first thing in the morning after a full night shift. And so things like that make you become creative. And that element of coaching is fun for me. I like things where it's not simple and you have to think and you're forced to get creative with workouts and what you're doing and problem solve. And you're coaching someone in Amsterdam who's doing MB and stuff like that.
That's always the tricky one. I've heard that, that Holland is not the most ideal place to train for hills.
Yeah, treadmills are coming a long way as well. So,
I think endurance is obviously a big one. How do you kind of help people kind of increase their endurance?
Lots of easy running. So teaching them what easy is.
Yeah.
And that can, I guess, again, we can use a multitude of tools. It can be your heart rate, it can be breathing and you talk, all these things. We use those tools to help someone understand what easy actually feels like. Because what happens when you start running, right? You have your 5K loop. Yeah. And you do that a couple of times. And each time you do it, you go a little bit quicker and a little bit quicker and a little bit quicker. And eventually you get a lot quicker. Yeah. And you keep doing that 5K loop. And eventually you started at 25 minutes and now you're running 18 minutes. But every time you go out, you want to run faster than 18 minutes, right? Going back to teaching someone what actually easy really is so that you can do workouts. Because until you know what easy is, well, then you can't do workouts. Because then in between those workouts, you're still going to be trying to run too hard. Building up some aerobic capacity or endurance is just lots of easy to steady running. For some people, it might just even be walking. Capacity might be so low. Get them to walk up the mountain. So even something as simple as hiking. So slowly building up that endurance and using other tools that you have at your disposal while they can't handle the running volume that they're eventually going to need, whether it is hiking or whatever else, getting on a bike but getting people to understand what easy is, because that's how you build up volume.
And, when someone comes to you, and says like, I did this race, I want to do it again, want to improve my kind of times, is that, how do you kind of, obviously there's a multitude of factors, but it's like, how do you analyze and work out what exactly, it's going to take to kind of increase the times?
Yeah. So I guess like in some ways, coming back to what I said earlier, if the person's still fairly new, knowing that like a year of consistent training will get them a long way to achieving that. So can I just continue to build on what they've done, but also understand what they've done? If they've come from another coach or they've been doing it by themselves, like really understand what they've done. It blows my mind. And I've seen quite a few, not South African coaches, but international coaches who take on a high-level athletes, but even a beginner in understanding their training history, and they don't do a proper understanding, like an analysis of what the person's done. For elite athletes, I'll sit and spend days working through what they've done previously. And the same thing, if someone comes to me that's new, well then what training history can I get from them? Like if it's their school sport, or understand what sport they played and at what level and what they did at practice and training, so that you have an idea of like, where is this person's, where are their capacities, where do they sit? And so that's such an important thing to understand. If someone played soccer or field hockey, they're very different to if they played rugby or tennis or whatever, golf. Or so an understanding like, where do these capacities sit? Where are the gaps? So if someone came to me and said, because Otta's always a good example, I guess, because the medals are based on the hours that you run. So often someone will come and I did a 7-hour Otta, and next year I want to do 6. And then really trying to delve into what they've done. Did they break down the race into the various attributes, and did they work through those different attributes? And if they didn't, where are the gaps? And try to plug those gaps first. Try to keep what they've built, but try to plug the gaps. It's not to throw everything out and say, I know everything, keep what they have, and slowly start to add. So then you're doing it methodically, right? So you're like, okay, this is where you start. This is what we've added. What's the result? Okay. we need to add something else because this isn't where we need to be. Okay, we add one more thing. Yeah. Where are we now? And I think that's the other thing. Too many people throw too much at someone. So you actually have no idea what's working.
Yes, yeah.
They go down to the track, they run 400s at a pace that they realistically couldn't run for 3Ks. Then on 2 days later, they go and do 20-minute hill repeats. And then on a weekend, they do a long run on the mountain one week and a long run on the road next week. Which direction is your body going to go? For physiology to adapt and to create stable adaptations, you need a high frequency of a very similar dose of stimulus, right? So I keep mentioning double threshold, but why does that work? Well, it's a high frequency of adaptational stress. So of course your body is going to move in that direction because of the frequency of that stimulus. It's not the stimulus is magical. It's just because you're hitting it consistently. And so this is the other thing people don't understand is they look at training through the lens of one variable, weekly mileage or hours, but not unpacking what that looks like. What are the different variables within that, right? Because not all running is the same. So what is the intention of each run? So if I give you a workout today and tomorrow is a recovery run, I say to you, the intention of this recovery run is for you to feel better so that you can handle more load in 2 days' time.
Yes. Yeah.
Is it fair of me to then judge you as a coach to say, okay, well, you chose 30 minutes as your easy run because that's what helped you to feel better versus 45 minutes. When I'm looking at the end of the week and I said, well, why did you run 8 hours instead of 7 hours, 45 or whatever? Because the intention of each of those runs is significantly different, right? So we need to be very careful of looking at one number and judging our training based on that one number.
You know, when it comes to going back to kind of the actual running now, you know, if you doing quite a hard run and, you know, you start feeling some discomfort or you start feeling some pain, what is the kind of go-to, do you kind of go to in terms of analyzing, you know, what exactly is going on?
So again, I think this comes down to like the psychology of sports. And so like, what is your why? And I think knowing that there's no right or wrong emotion to utilize in those moments. Sometimes you run from anger. Sometimes you run from sadness. Sometimes you run from happiness. Sometimes you can keep a quiet mind. So understanding those things, none of them are right and none of them are wrong, but understanding, again, they're tools that an athlete has at their disposal. And so, I don't know, maybe that day your boss was a bit of a dick. And so you're running from a little bit of anger. Maybe you're a bit sad. And so I think it's just being aware of those. And for someone that's new to the sports, just being mindful and being curious about it. Like, I'm interested, why am I running with anger? Because it's not always going to be there for you to run from. And that's where people that are new to sport can learn a lot from the pros. Because often you'll see when there are big transition points in an elite athlete's life, you'll see a change in performance, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Someone goes through a divorce. Some people run exceptionally well with that chaos. Some people fall apart. Sometimes when their life becomes stable and good, actually they lose a lot of that motivation and drive. Because running is a hard sport, right? And sometimes that darkness is what allows people to flourish. You got to go somewhere. It hurts, and your body is naturally wanting to slow you down, right? So it hurts less. So I think unpacking that with someone is often quite interesting. And I guess it's where it's difficult with. It's a lot easier with elite athletes that you have the reality a lot closer relationships to. It's not so easy with someone, particularly at the beginning, you don't know them very well. They might not even tell you about it, right? That something's going on. But it comes back to intrinsic motivation. So like for me, what I absolutely love is you get certain individuals who are able to do it just out of pride, just because they refuse to not give of their best. And for me, that's a wonderful approach to being able to run, or in any aspect of life, right? Is to just get the most out of yourself because you're too proud not to.
And when it comes to developing training plans, you know, how do you kind of go about, you know, what's your kind of approach to developing your training plans?
So find out where they are now, what the goal is, and kind of, as I said, just work step by step through what are the elements of, you know, if you're doing, I'll give you an example. If you're doing UTCT 55K, say, okay, the person in front of me, how much of this race are they going to hike? Maybe it's going to be 60%. Okay, so 60% of their training in that last 8 to 10 weeks is going to be hiking. Because that's specific, right? It'll be within a run, but 60% of it will be hiking because they're going to need to be doing a lot of hiking in the race. How much time are they going uphill? How much time are they going to be going downhill? How much time they're running on the flats? What are the different attributes? So maybe now they never hike. So let's start them with 4 times 5 minutes at a steady effort within an easy run. So an hour easy run and they do 4 times 5 minutes. Okay, cool. There's going to be some downhill running. Of course, they're going to probably get some of that in their long run. They're going to be some hills. So maybe we throw some hills in early, but we do short hills to build the foundation to run a little bit faster. So like putting in place the different tools that they're going to need, their bodies are going to need to be able to achieve the goal piece by piece. Exactly like you would if you came to me and you said, I want to run a road marathon and I want to run a sub 3-hour road marathon in December. Say, cool. What does your training look like now? Maybe you run 5 days a week. You've got a 5K PB of 20 minutes or 18 minutes. You're going to run sub 3 hours. So, okay, cool. I'll get your half marathon time, I'll get any previous marathon times, your 5K time. And I'll say like, okay, where are the gaps? Is it speed? Is it endurance? And slowly start to put in place those foundations, knowing that maybe 3 weeks before the race, I want you to do, if you want to run a sub 3-hour marathon, maybe running 35 or 36K long run. And within that, I want you to be doing 18Ks at marathon pace. So how do I work back from that? How do I get you to a point where you can do that session, where that's a natural progression from the week before or 2 weeks before? So nothing's a big jump. Your body wants gradual increases in stress, not these massive increases in stress. And accepting and educating someone that if you say to me, look, I want to run a sub 3-hour marathon, which is an exceptionally competitive time, even if you've only been running for 2 years, you shouldn't need to do the training that someone who's been running for 10 years, who's got that same goal, is going to need to do. Because you're far earlier along in your journey. There's a lot more low-hanging fruit. So you don't need to do the training sessions that someone else does. If I want to get Kane to improve, or Daniel to improve, they've been running since they were 10 years old. So the level of workout that they need to do to move the needle is significantly bigger, but they have the capacity to absorb that. If I'm coaching someone who's a lot newer, Matt Healy is an example, he hasn't been running for as many years. So even if they have the same goal, I don't need to give him the same volume of work because what will move the needle is significantly less than someone who's been running for 20 years, even if they run the identical time. People don't understand that. They see a workout and they say, well, this person ran a sub 3-hour marathon and they did 10 times 2K at marathon pace. I need to do that. But maybe you don't. Maybe you need to do 5. And those 5 reps is all you need to do to achieve the same thing. But because you've been running for 7 years less or 8 years less or whatever. So that's the part of the role of a coach, right? Is understanding that, not to try and give, and that's hard because people come to you, and as I said, a lot of runners are quite A-type. They have big goals. They want to achieve things. So you say to them, like, I need to actually hold you back, not only to not let you get injured, but also actually to ultimately let you get to your potential. It's easy to get someone fit for 1 year.
One
Help
race.
them improve for 10 years straight. That's hard.
And do you kind of encourage people when they come to you to pick a race or pick something to work towards?
Really depends on the personality type. But I think for most people, that does work. For most people, to get the most out of themselves, they need a goal. They need something a little bit scary. Some people can run. Kane's a good example. Whether he had a race or didn't have a race, he would train every day. But there are some people that to get a little bit more out of themselves, they need a goal. So I think it's good to have goals. But I think it's good to have multiple goals. Have a progression of goals. I want to do this. Okay, what can we do to assess whether you're improving or not beforehand? Something that's enjoyable, less stressful. Remember why you're doing this.
When it comes to communication, what is the kind of give and take there? What should people kind of expect, or what and how do you kind of work that kind of process, or is it very person dependent?
No. So the way I do it is daily communication. As I said, to increase my predictive power of what I think, my hypothesis of how I think someone's going to respond to training, I like to hear from them daily. And there are people who find that difficult. And so over time, I've developed like a little scorecard that I like people to send me back on each workout. And then there are others who will have that and then add more qualitative information. I'm happy to say what the scorecard is because I think it's quite valuable. So for me, the first thing is enjoyment. So score your enjoyment of the session. 5 or 10, whatever you want. Your motivation or enthusiasm to do the session, your energy levels, your health, your stress, your sleep, muscle stiffness, and then your own perception of how difficult or easy the run was. Yeah. I have enjoyment at the top, because for me it's the most important thing. Motivation second, because typically when someone's overtrained, their motivation will start to decline, or their energy levels will start to decline, or their enjoyment will start to decline. And then obviously some other elements that people don't always tell you: how they're sleeping, what the stress levels in their life like, what's their perception of their health. Are they healthy? Some people also don't tell you when they're starting to get a bit sick. So you suddenly see health score, they're at a 5 normally, and now they're at a 2. Okay, cool. Maybe they don't want to tell me, but I can see it. So it's a little bit easier for them to provide, I guess, feedback. And then the last part is to help me calibrate my perception of how difficult a session is with their perception of how. And that has been fascinating, actually, because sometimes I design a session, I think this is quite challenging, someone finds it easy, and vice versa. So just to help refine that. Or I make a session that's, let's say, fluffy. It's like a little bit of stuff, but it's essentially an easy run. And then I see like a very high perception of effort, 4 or 5. And I'm like, whoa, I need to explain how to do this better. So again, gives me a piece of information of, and then normally what I'll try and do is I'll try and do like a little video explaining what the intention of the session is, and just post it to the group, and they can all have a look at it. And those who don't understand can hopefully then understand, refine, improve. Because for me, that learning element is crucial. How do you get someone to do a session? You send someone out and they do 5 times 1 minute hills, they're going to go too hard, and you can tell them whatever effort level you want. They are going to run, and they're going to get to the top of each hill, and they're going to have to put their hands on their head and catch their breath, right? That always happens. Doesn't matter who you are. I still do it. So, but by the 3rd or 4th time, they start to understand. So I might say to them, tell me what your Strava gap is for those hill repeats, They're like, I don't know, 2 minutes 45. I'm like, well, can you run a 14 odd 5K? No. Well, you're probably going too hard then. You know what I mean? So slowly, don't do it in a way that's, like being a prick, but do it in a way that's educational, interesting and fun, and let them come to the conclusion, because then they're more likely to adjust.
Yeah. I also think people that are looking for, that type of the people that want to kind of be coached as well, if it's kind of like an immediate offense type thing, then it's like probably not, coaching's probably not for you type thing.
Yeah. And so many people, like one of the questions I always ask at the beginning is like, tell me about like a mentor, a teacher or coach that you really resonated with, and tell me what were the attributes that you enjoyed. And so often people will say like they want someone to be straight up with me, but often when you are straight up with them, that's not actually what they wanted. So kind of like this is a way to expose them, to ask them the question, pose the question back to them, whether or not that effort level was right. And then don't judge. If they say it felt easy or whatever, fine. You know that at some point the workout's going to get hard enough that if they're not pacing themselves well, or they're going to get caught out. And then it's a learning opportunity, right? Not to say I told you so. It's fun if someone does something and you're giving them a workout at their 5K pace. Then you don't have to give them a 5K. Just give them a 3K time trial. And then all of a sudden that they see that their 5K pace and the intervals that they're doing was way off because they couldn't sustain it even for a 3K. You don't have to say anything, but it's a learning opportunity, right?
What are the kind of biggest mistakes that you see from people, that you coach?
I think trying to do too much is the biggest. Trying to copy what other people are doing. I think Strava's fun, but it takes an incredibly disciplined person to not let it affect you. And so I think it's very easy to, and I think a lot of athletes are well-meaning in what information they're putting out. But I think what a lot of athletes don't understand is that in order to get to the highest level, you're a genetic freak.
Yes.
Like you don't get a seat, you don't race at that level without having 1 in a million genetics. And they forget that. And so the information that they put out on training and ideas and things like that's well-meaning, but unfortunately is incredibly misguided. And so I think really understand, maybe the biggest takeaway message is understand that we are all individuals and we all respond differently to training. If you had 3 people and you train them identically, one might get better, one might stay the same, and one might get materially worse. And there are studies in this. And that always stood out to me. Because like actually what we're doing, if you're claiming that you're coaching people individually and you are writing cookie cutter training programs, you are making a significant percentage of the athletes that you work with worse. Probably at best, a few of them are getting a bit better, and a lot of them are probably staying the same. But it's not something that we're particularly well educated in, right? What makes a good coach?
Yeah. Well, that's the question.
So we know what good rugby coaches and football coaches, and we see them on TV and Netflix and all these things. What makes a good running coach? It's not a sport that's in the media a lot.
Yeah. And what in your mind makes a good running coach?
Sure. I think the curiosity, someone that's really interested in problem solving, critical thinking, someone that's passionate about sports. And for me personally, I think people that are interested in like a array of sports, not just one, because I think you can learn so much from other sporting codes, from other coaches, because it comes down to like what makes good coaches is probably the personal side, right? And in history, of course, maybe there are a couple now, but typically they're not sports scientists. Typically they come from actually quite eccentric people and from strange backgrounds who were passionate about the sport themselves and made all the mistakes in the book and learned that way, right? And Lydiard, Seredy, Igloy, all these guys, they're all very eccentric characters, but the same in other sports, right? I mean, Rusty's quite an eccentric guy. Eddie Jones, or these guys are. I always liked Phil Jackson as the Chicago Bulls coach. So like reading his book, I probably learned as much about coaching as I have any running coach, because it's in how you're dealing with people, particularly at a high level. It requires a little bit of different skill. I think for someone who's new, you want someone who's probably very empathetic and kind with their time and explains things carefully and doesn't try to use big words. And because at the end of the day, right, you just want someone you can trust, knows you got your best interests. First, do no harm.
It's so important as well as to understand the level of where the coach is at as well, And you were saying earlier, about you're in that privileged position, but I think it's great as well, to have a coach that says something like that, because then where they're coming from and what position they're at, rather than someone who's just, I'll take you on, regardless of what.
You can understand it though, because as well as let's say you have a full-time job, you're a good runner. It's an easy way to earn some extra money, right? In this country at least, and I think in a lot of different places as well, it's like there are no real barriers to entry. So you could have a full-time job and coach 10 people on the side, and you may be incredibly well-intentioned, but I guess at the end of the day, like it relies very much on the person then thinking very carefully about their why, and as a coach, their why and what are they doing, and are they doing the right thing, and do they have the knowledge to be doing it? I still have imposter syndrome, and I've been doing this for a long time.
What is the golden nugget of advice that you would give to people, just one kind of thing when they're kind of looking for a coach? What is the best kind of advice? Or maybe that's the advice you've been given, or...
Yeah, I mean, I'd go back to like, do your research, understand who you're trusting with your health. And if someone says to you, this is the only way, then run.
Yeah, I like that one.
Someone should be prepared to really try and understand you, your sporting history. What have you done in the past, your injury history? Because those are the things that are going to be able to help them get you to a place where you're ready to handle the type of training. I mean, these are big goals. You're wanting to do... I mean, people don't pick small goals in trail running.
No, not at all.
You're entrusting someone with your health. And I can promise you it's not just writing a training program.
And it's definitely not someone who immediately jumps at a yes to a big goal as well. Like, I think if there's a bit of hesitancy and a bit of caution, then that kind of shows quite a bit of knowledge and education.
And integrity.
Yeah.
I always get fearful when someone asks me about training them for comrades. I'm very careful who I take on, because to send someone on the duration of training runs that they need to do to be able to accomplish that. And no one can tell me that it's healthy for you. So, you need that feeling of, shucks, am I doing the right thing here? Can I actually help this person? Less than, well, I'm probably a better option than someone else is your reason. Like, can I help this person?
And, in terms of your own personal, I mean, maybe in your running or your coaching, are there kind of big goals, big dreams, short, medium, long term?
Yeah. So less so on the running front. I think, like, for me, can I stay fit enough that I can go for a run with anyone that I coach? for some of them, it has to be a very easy run, but at least I can keep up. On the coaching front, there's some exciting ideas that I have and directions that I want to go. I don't want to talk too much about those yet. Being based out in Stellenbosch now, it gives a clue. And it's a hub of endurance sports. I think there are areas that I can learn a lot in different formats of running, and I'd like to get a little bit stuck into that. The ultimate dream is coaching an Olympian.
Oh wow, okay. Sport specific or
so middle distance or 5 or 10K. Would be
track or
would be the goal.
Sure.
So I think you got to pick things that scare you, right? Things where you're going to have those feelings of like imposter syndrome, where you're going to feel out of your depth, and you got to sink or swim, and that excites me. It always has. Like, is to put yourself in the deep end and see how you cope. But I've got a lot to learn, and I think that's the exciting part, is that you have a lot to learn.
Yeah, it's crazy how it's the same sport, but it's just so different.
It's so different, and it's been nice. Obviously, I've had a fair amount of experience with it over the years, particularly where guys have come across from trail and jumped onto the road and track. And Bianca did some track a few years ago, and Kane obviously qualified for Western Province cross country 2 years ago. So we have some experience where I've got a lot more to learn, and I'm excited for it. It's gonna be a fun challenge.
Cool, exciting.
This country has so much potential. There's so many incredible athletes, and a lot of them don't have very much. And what I'm passionate about is helping those individuals, because it kind of comes back to what I said right at the beginning. To run fast, you don't need very much.
Yes.
And the fastest runners don't sit in the southern suburbs, I can tell you that much.
No, for sure.
So like giving them help, whatever it is, to get them to a level where we should have guys at the top step of the Olympics, and everything from the 800 meter upwards. And I'd love to have some role in that. How? We don't know yet, but that's definitely the goal.
Amazing. Awesome. And going back to the beginning question about the socks, what are those 2 words that you would put on the back of the socks?
Based on what we've spoken about, what do you think I would say?
Consistency, but then in another word.
No, I'd
keep
say
consistent.
I'd say stay curious.
I love that. That's actually great. Amazing. Thank you very much. This was incredible.
Thank you for having me.
Incredibly insightful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. So
absolute pleasure. And good luck with the goals.
Thank you.
It's a big one.
It's going to be a long-term project, but let's see.
Amazing. Thank you.